If you want to do vintage clothes drop shipping, you got to have a strategy. And I want to share with you that strategy in today's conversation. You also got to have a vision. Okay. Let me give you an overview here. When you think about vintage clothes, you're of course speaking about fashion drop shipping, but you're speaking about a specific niche in fashion drop shipping. So you have all kinds of niches in fashion, but vintage clothes actually is a different I would say sector. Okay, the fashion industry is constantly evolving, and in recent years, a nostalgic trend has gained a considerable momentum, especially around COVID. Okay, vintage clothing, and what was once seen as outdated or passé has become an integral part of modern fashion, and with many consumers embracing vintage apparel for its a unique aesthetic and eco-conscious appeal. So that's really important. So if you listen to me, you are an entrepreneur. Dropshipping vintage clothes present a compelling opportunity to tap into this growing market. Again, I'm speaking about not a market nationally, but internationally. You have a global growing market. Okay, and so you can actually tap into the potential. You can access a market that allows you to earn profits with low startup cost and minimal inventory management. So this is really important from a, let's say, from a flexibility point of view. Okay, that's something to really think about. And one thing I also want to say here is that when it comes to drop shipping vintage clothes, you need to understand that vintage clothes are trending this year because you have many factors: cultural, environmental. You have socio-economic factors too. As consumers increasingly prioritize sustainability and individuality in their purchasing decision, basically, vintage clothing provides a unique solution that aligns with those values of bespoke clothing. You have sustainability in fashion. You have nostalgia and unique style, right? Because people want to look different. People want to look unique, and like vintage fashion offers that bespoke appeal. You also have a social media influence. Social media influence is really big when it comes to vintage clothes drop shipping. So let me talk to you about the steps here. If you want to really do a vintage clothes drop shipping, you need to first understand that you need to research. It's all about researching. Everything starts with research. So you need to research popular styles and eras. See, the thing is, when we talk about vintage, vintage can be 90s, can be the year 2000s, can be the 80s, can be the 70s, can be the 60s. Okay, so you have all kinds of eras. So the first step is in sourcing vintage clothing is understanding which eras and styles are in demand, especially when it comes to your specific target audience, because your target audience might be interested in a specific era that's not in demand really. So different generations have distinct preferences when it comes to fashion. Let me give you an example. So millennials, for instance, millennials and Gen Z are particularly fond of the 90s and early 2000s styles, with items like oversized jackets, graphic t-shirts, and vintage sneakers becoming highly sought after, especially in the states, like in the West. Okay. On the other hand, older generations may prefer the 70s or 80s, looking for items like belt button jeans, leather jackets, and vintage band tees. Right. It's all about the specific target audience that you have. Every target audience is different. Their needs are different. Their preferences are different. So to get a better sense of what's popular, you can follow fashion publications, trend reports, and vintage clothing blogs. Right? It's all about making sure you're getting as much resource, as much information, as much intel as possible. So websites like Vogue and Refinery 29 often feature articles on trending vintage styles. Okay, so read those blogs, and you want to get as much info as possible. Additionally, reviewing online marketplaces like Depop, Etsy, and eBay can provide insights into which types of vintage clothing are currently in demand based on search trends and sales data. especially the ones that really relate to your specific niche. So you after researching popular styles and eras, you want to use trend forecasting tools. The thing is, if you want to do a vintage clothes dropshipping, Intel is really important, but so are the tools. So are the tools that help you with analytics. In this economy, it's kind of crazy how people change their lifestyle like fast and very quickly. Okay, so if you don't have the right tool, the right forecasting tools, you'll be getting the wrong kind of data, right? And without without the right type of data, you cannot really survive. So in addition to keeping an eye on popular fashion blogs, you can also use trend forecasting tools to stay ahead of the curve. So services like WGSN and TrendStop offer in-depth trend reports, which includes insight into the vintage clothing markets, and that's what you want. I mean, if you're serious about vintage clothes dropshipping, you should be willing to pay for stuff, right? Pay for research, pay for a research that really tells you a lot about the market. And those platforms, WGSN and TrendStop, they actually track emerging trends in fashion and can provide guidance on what to stock for the upcoming seasons. And this helps you a lot because it helps you stay ahead of the competition and ensure that you are offering the styles that will resonate with your target customers. Remember, when you read a WGSN report or you read a trend stop report, you need to adapt it to your specific audience. Okay, remember, every audience is different. They have different preferences. They have different needs. So you have to slice and dice those reports and see how they adapt to your specific market. And also, you can also spy a little bit on your competitors. I mean, it's called benchmarking. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with spying on your competitors and see what kind of strategies they have in place and see if you can copy, if you can emulate. I mean, that's the better word. You can emulate some of the best practices. Again, it's something totally legal. It's called benchmarking. You're trying to really see what works, and you're trying to adapt it to your business model by even improving it. So that's really good. If you want to engage in vintage clothes dropshipping, you can also leverage social media. And what I love about social media is that every social media is different. Every social media has a different target audience. Every social media every social media resonates more with a specific target audience than others, right? So if you think about LinkedIn, for instance, the kind of audience you have on LinkedIn is not the same as the audience you have on TikTok. It's not the same you have on Instagram, the same you have on Pinterest, right? So you have different audiences, different markets, different needs, different preferences when it comes to vintage clothes dropshipping. For instance, if you want to go after a more professional sort of audience, you want to go with the LinkedIn. But see, the thing is, LinkedIn is the is quite essentially a professional target audience, but you have to adapt your strategy to the platform. Okay, one thing I want to say is that you don't have to really stick to only one platform. You can have a multi-platform strategy. You can say, you know what, I want to sell vintage clothing from the 80s, and I know my target audience is on LinkedIn, is on Facebook, is on Pinterest, and it also is on Snapchat, for instance. Okay, so you can really apply your strategy across the board. Social media actually remains one of the best ways to discover trending vintage styles. Instagram, TikTok, and Pinterest are filled with influencers showcasing their vintage finds, and many vintage sellers use these platforms to promote their items. Okay, so all you want to do is that you want to look at the number of likes, the number of shares, the number of comments to actually see the engagement that a specific item has, but also the interest, right? If you have lots of likes, if you have 1 million likes, for instance, on Facebook or Instagram, that tells you a lot about the appeal that this particular vintage cloth has in your target market, right? So this is something to really think about. And by following influencers who specialize in vintage fashion, You can observe which items are being worn, liked, and shared most frequently. Additionally, joining vintage focused groups on Facebook or Reddit can provide valuable insights. Users often share their latest finds and discuss which trends are gaining traction. So, by actively participating in these communities, you can actually learn about emerging trends that may not yet be widely recognized, giving you actually a competitive advantage. So, this is something to really think about. You can also use online marketplaces to track demand. So if you want to really do a vintage clothes drop shipping, you have to really pay attention to online marketplaces big time. And when I say online marketplaces, I'm talking primarily about Amazon. I'm talking about eBay. I'm talking about Etsy and so on and so forth. Okay, especially when it comes to relationship. Okay, so e-commerce platforms like Etsy, eBay, and Depop are gold mines for tracking which vintage items are in demand, and these platforms allow sellers to showcase their products and provide visibility into which items are selling quickly and at what price point. So, studying these platforms can help you identify specific brands, designs, and garment types that are gaining popularity, especially in your specific geography. Because when it comes to fashion, right, every geography is different, and so you want to take note of the most popular sellers in the vintage niche. Observe their pricing strategies, the types of garment they specialize in, and their branding. And this can help you decide which types of products are worth pursuing and how to position your own online store for success, right? Especially when it comes to adaptability. Also, you want to establish strong supplier relationships. So, building a reliable supplier network is crucial when sourcing vintage clothing for drop shipping. So, what happens here is that basically, unlike traditional fashion, vintage clothing is a one of a kind market, meaning that finding consistent suppliers can be challenging, right? Because you're talking about stuff that is quote unquote outdated or passe, right? So you have a limited supply actually. But once you build relationships with trusted vintage suppliers, you can ensure that you have access to high quality items at very competitive prices. So one way to find reliable suppliers is by attending vintage fairs and thrift events. And these events provide an opportunity to meet wholesalers, resellers, and manufacturers who specialize in vintage clothing. And they also give you a chance to evaluate the condition and authenticity of the items in person, which is really important for maintaining the quality of your dropshipping business. So this is really important. So let me talk to you about the challenges here. So if you think about vintage clothes dropshipping, you need to understand that some challenges are really important. I mean, and you have to pay attention to those challenges if you want to succeed big time. Okay. So while vintage clothes dropshipping offers substantial profit potential, several challenges may arise, especially if you are going after a very specific niche. Okay. Let me talk to you about some of the common issues and practical solutions to actually put in place. First of all, sourcing authentic vintage items can be problematic. Okay, because you want to ensure the authenticity and quality of the items you sell, right? Since vintage clothing is defined by its age, it can sometimes be difficult to distinguish between genuine vintage and modern reproductions or mass produced garments. So the best solution here is to work with trustworthy suppliers who can provide provenance for their items, right? You need to clarify provenance for the items. Okay, so establishing solid relationships with reliable wholesalers and vintage sellers will ensure that you are receiving authentic and high quality products. Additionally, consider using your own knowledge of fashion history to evaluate the authenticity of each piece. For example, knowing how to identify vintage Levi's jeans by the stitching or understanding, let's say, the markings of high end designers can help you ensure the integrity of your inventory. And that's what you want. You want to ensure the integrity of your inventory. So that's the first challenge, okay? When it comes to vintage dropshipping, vintage clothing dropshipping. Next, you have a pricing strategy. So, pricing vintage clothing is often tricky. You need to find the right balance between competitive pricing and maintaining a profit margin. Because, there is no price record here. Something that happens 30 years ago or 40 years ago, you got to still price it today. So you got to find a price strategy that works for you and the market. So, because vintage items are often rare, it can be difficult to assess their value accurately. Overpricing can lead to slow sales, while underpricing can result in missed profits. Solution here is that you want to study the pricing of similar items across various platforms, such as eBay, Poshmark, and Depop. So, by comparing prices, you can determine the going rates for vintage items within your niche. Additionally, you want to offer a price range for different types of vintage clothing so that you can appeal to different budget levels. For example, rare or high demand items can be priced higher, while more common pieces can be sold at a lower price point to actually attract a wider audience. So, when it comes to a vintage clothes dropshipping, managing supply and demand is also something to really think about because vintage clothing is often sourced from secondhand suppliers or auctions. It can be challenging to maintain a steady inventory of popular items. Additionally, trends in vintage clothing can change quickly, right? Think about it. So, this can really make it difficult to predict demand. So, the solution here is that you want to diversify your inventory to ensure that you are offering a range of items that appeal to different customers. For example, stocking both classic vintage pieces like denim, jackets, or vintage tees, and more niche items such as retro dresses or designer handbags can help mitigate supply challenges. Additionally, you want to consider using a dropshipping platform with automated inventory management so you can quickly identify when items are out of stock and adjust your listings, let's say, accordingly. Also, you want to think about managing customer expectations because the thing is that since vintage clothing often shows signs of wear, managing customer expectations is critical, right? Because you do not want to piss customer off, really, okay? And shoppers who actually often purchase vintage items may expect them to be in pristine condition, which can lead to dissatisfaction if the garment shows noticeable signs of use, right? You do not want to really have this situation. So always provide clear and honest descriptions of each item's condition. Include detailed photos that highlight any imperfections, such as stains, tears, or fading. Establishing a transparent return policy will also help manage customer expectations and reduce the risk of negative feedback. And you do not want to have negative feedback. So, in conclusion, if you think about it, vintage clothes dropshipping offers a unique and lucrative business opportunity, right? Allowing many entrepreneurs to tap into a growing market that emphasizes sustainability. You have individuality and nostalgia, really. So, by researching trending vintage styles, working with reliable suppliers, and overcoming common challenges, you can create a successful dropshipping business that resonates with consumers. And the cool thing is that vintage clothing actually is going to become more popular and popular and popular. So you have a great market potential over in the next 5 to 10 years. As a recap into this conversation, I spoke to you about vintage clothes dropshipping. I gave you the overview, the steps, the challenges, and now the recap. Thank you so much. God bless you. I will see you next time. Until then, remember, stay marvelous.